Welcome, everybody. My name is Revathi Prasad, and I'm the Vice President of Programs for the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society. We're going to get started on today's programming, but before we do that, Benton is a 43-year-old nonprofit that focuses on broadband policy, working to make sure everyone in the United States can use and benefit from high-quality, affordable broadband. We strengthen local, state, and national leadership by providing timely information, rigorous evidence, practical guidance, and the advocacy needed to articulate and implement a broadband for all agenda. The three-part Power of Partnership webinar series is a collaboration with the Department of Education's Office of Educational Technology. Our first webinar, which we hope you joined us for, highlighted the work of North Carolina, and today we focus on New Mexico. The final webinar in the series will focus on Maine's work, and that's scheduled for July 10th, and we'll hope you'll be joining us for that one as well. Finally, we'd like to thank Isabel Zachariah and Dominique Dallas from the Department of Education's Office of Educational Technology for their partnership and collaboration for this series. And now I'd like to turn it over to my Benton Institute colleague, Zoe Walker, who will be moderating today's discussion. Zoe?
Hi, thank you, Revathi. I'm Zoe Walker, a writing associate at the Benton Institute for Broadband and Society and a former educator. The purpose of the Power of Partnership webinar series is to highlight some of the states that have made excellent commitments to work with educational institutions to advance digital equity outcomes. I'm excited to highlight the work and partnerships of the New Mexico Office of Broadband Access and Expansion today in the second session of this webinar series. If you missed the first installment of the Power of Partnership, we'll be sharing a link to the recording at the end of this session, along with contact information for today's panelists and some other resources. I'm going to start off with a brief overview of the state digital equity plans and capacity grants. The Digital Equity Act, part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021, provided $2.75 billion to establish 3 grant programs that promote digital equity and inclusion. The first of those programs, the Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program, is a program that enabled 50 states and territories to develop digital equity plans. The Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program is a program that provides funding to the entities that developed the digital equity plans in order to implement them. In a moment, our fantastic partner from the Office of Educational Technology will introduce our speakers from New Mexico, who will talk about the process of creating the state digital equity plan and how the state thought about the intersection of education and digital equity. After that, we'll head into a moderated Q&A session. I want to invite folks watching this on YouTube to submit questions, and I will keep an eye out and bring them into our discussion as I can. I'd like to introduce Dominique Dallas, who will introduce our representatives from New Mexico. Dominique is an Impact Fellow at the Department of Education's Office of Educational Technology, where she works on advancing digital equity and artificial intelligence literacy. Dominique?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay, excellent. Hello, everyone. I'm Dominique Dallas. I am a Policy Advisor Fellow from the Office of Education Technology. How is everyone doing today? Great. So yes, I am with the Office of Education Technology, and I just want to go over the just the mission of the office and the work that we do in digital equity. And so the U.S. Department of Education Technology develops the National Education Technology Plan and policy to establish the vision for how technology can be used to transform teaching and learning, and how to make everywhere, all the time learning possible for early learners through K-12, higher education, and adult education. And so in order to operationalize this mission, one of our priorities has been digital equity. And through our digital equity work, we are ensuring that the education sector can weigh in and tap into the resources that are coming down the pipeline for digital equity. And so that means specifically in relation to NTIA's Digital Equity Act programs, we support states as a plan, develop, and are now moving towards implementing the state digital equity plans. We have done this through meeting with state leaders from both broadband state offices and the education sector to support the collaboration between these groups. and letting state educational leaders know when their digital equity plans were made available for public comment, and highlighting state plans for their commitments in partnering with the education sector and blogs and webinars just like this. And so I'm excited to showcase one of these states and their partners, the work that they are doing towards digital equity and the collaboration in the education sector. So today we have the 3 representatives from New Mexico, and the first representative is Jennifer Navarez, Neela Kruger, and John Chadwick.
Good morning,
Hello, everyone.
everybody.
Hello, good morning. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Neela Kruger. I work with the Office of Broadband Access and Expansion here in New Mexico. I started about 6 months ago with the office, and I am a program manager for the State Digital Equity Capacity Grant.
And I'll introduce myself next. Hi, everybody. My name is Jennifer Navarez. I am actually a certificated teacher and came from public education into government. I run a nonprofit currently called Community Learning Network, which has been working with the state of New Mexico before the Office of Broadband even existed. And we have been participating on the broadband and digital equity support team at our state. Calling in today from the Land of Enchantment, which many people may not know, that's our state nickname. Hey, John, you're on.
There we go. My name is John Chadwick, and I'm with the Public Education Department. And my title, functional title, is Digital Equity Coordinator. And it is an honor and privilege to be on this call and work with. And I have the honor of working with Jennifer and Neela and the great team from OBI.
Thanks for those introductions. I'm excited to have you guys on the call. Today's webinar is the second of a 3-part series highlighting states that have committed to strong partnerships with educational institutions as part of their digital equity plans. For the article, Digital and Educational Equity, How States Plan to Partner with Educational Institutions, my colleagues and I conducted an audit of state digital equity plans. We noticed a few themes as we went through them. First was that digital equity is critical to educational equity, as you cannot achieve equitable education without digital equity. Some states, including New Mexico, North Carolina, and Maine, the 3 states highlighted in this webinar series, went further with this and realized that you cannot achieve digital equity without the participation of and partnership with educational institutions. Lastly, many states, again including our highlighted states, realized that educational institutions can be key partners in the fight for digital equity, for everything from device distribution to skills training and assessment. Dominique, I'm going to hand it back over to you to explain what was particularly strong about New Mexico's plan.
Yeah, thanks, Zoe. So we noticed in New Mexico's digital equity plan, it included further developing New Mexico's statewide education network to support the expansion of high-speed connectivity to schools. Furthermore, due to your point about collaborating with workforce agencies, institutional higher ed organizations, labor organizations, and the New Mexico Public Education Department to expand access to devices, digital skill training through community learning opportunities and technical support. Furthermore, developing and communicating accessibility guidance to state, tribal, and local agencies and organizations, including best practices for website design and maintenance. And then lastly, increasing opportunities to learn about online safety and privacy practices in partnership with workforce agencies, labor organizations, and the New Mexico Public Education Department. And I'll pass it back to you.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Dominique. Now we're going to hear some presentations from Jennifer and John about the state process of developing the digital equity plan.
We do have a slide deck, and just double checking, there it is. Perfect. Thanks, Zoe and team. We'll just walk through this brief overview from our state of New Mexico. we call the Road to Digital Equity in New Mexico. Next slide. First, we want to just dispel any notion of grandeur. It is a long drive and it's a bumpy road. So we just wanted to make sure everyone knows it's not usually a straight line, and it's often not easy. In our case, the pandemic really highlighted the needs in our state. In the immediate aftermath of the beginning of the pandemic, we started a homework gap team. That team was relatively informal, but interagency. So representatives from all different organizations and agencies across the state would meet regularly, literally weekly, to address findings, share information, look for solutions, and collaborate across the entire state and all of the agencies that were impacted. That informal and ongoing consistency of meeting really established relationships that have served us well and continue to carry forward today in helping us as we move forward towards both digital equity and educational equity. In the immediate, also want to give a shout out to Information Technology Disaster Resource Center. The beginning of the pandemic, we relied on them. They came to the aid of our state, deployed over 190 hotspots in local rural sites all over the state, so that many of our students and their family members that could not go to school or work and were forced to be working or learning from home could at least go to local sites, whether it's the library, the fire station, et cetera, to get access when they needed it. Many of those are still functioning, and they've also come to our rescue. As many of you know, we're dealing with a severe fire in the Mescalero Apache region down south, and they are currently here again deploying emergency comms. Grateful to them for that. We also had at the time a community response. Many of the people in the Homework Gap team were involved in the development of the Broadband Collective, where our local funders, community foundations, our state community foundation, philanthropic organizations across the state, as well as nonprofits and agencies in our community banded together and informally created the Broadband Collective. That collective started raising money and started distributing funds to local organizations to help address the digital divide. And quickly, our legislature moved into action. We'll go to the next slide. Grateful to the legislature, and also want to shout out to that because they established the Office of Broadband Access and Expansion. As Neela mentioned, it's relatively new, and we do call it OBI, not Obey, because our acronym in our state, people are pretty independent spirited, and so we call it OBI. It has a Jedi ring to it. Anyway, that legislation by our legislature at the state level also mandated the development of the Connect New Mexico Council and the Connect New Mexico working groups. That council meets monthly and includes representatives from various agencies and industry leaders. And the Connect New Mexico working groups meet regularly. Some meet weekly, some meet every 2 weeks, some meet monthly. And some of those working groups include digital equity inclusion, regional planning and stakeholder engagement, mapping, data and evaluation, permits, right-of-way, pole attachments, also referred to as PROP, and the tribal working group. In the digital equity inclusion working group, shout out to that team. They are determined and passionate. Many agencies, organizations, and trusted organizations in our community participate. And they have over 90 members in that group already. Also want to just shout out to our state, because as other topics arise, there is now a cybersecurity working group, a digital accessibility coalition, the Digital Equity and Education Advisory Group that John will mention more about, and of course, we'll talk a little bit about the Statewide Education Network Working Group. So those are formal ways for our stakeholders to literally get together and address issues. Of course, emerging in the aftermath of that, NTIA launched the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment BEAD initiative and the Digital Equity Act. Next slide. As the state mobilized to accommodate those opportunities, the state digital equity plan was written to increase digital inclusion activities and support digital equity statewide. And the plan identifies digital inclusion actions that are needed to make digital equity accessible for all New Mexicans. You can read our plan on the link there and at the connect.nm.gov website. Next slide. To write the plan and to build on the council and working groups that were established by the legislature, the Office of Broadband kicked into gear. And as the planning grant took hold, we launched a spring sprint, which kicked off with Broadband Day at the Roundhouse and our governor making a proclamation in support of broadband statewide. We launched regional meetings in alliance with the structure that our Economic Development Agency maps the state. We hosted a network operators conference, the first one in Albuquerque. We hosted Let's Get Going boot camps. We hosted multiple statewide summits, the first in partnership with NTIA. And we've had many tribal convenings, as well as government to government tribal consultations, because in our state we have 23 recognized tribes and multiple tribal languages. We also held a digital equity summit last October and have hosted, like many states, a series of interviews, focus groups, and community meetings and events, and partnered with so many organizations and agencies, including the Tech Council, the Association of Counties, the Municipality League, USDA, the Telehealth Association, AARP, et cetera, our Chamber of Commerce, the Council of Governors from the Pueblos, and more. Most of all, next slide, in that timeline of events, we were building our digital equity plan, and I just want to shout out to, because our public education department has been involved in the working groups, and our Office of Broadband and support team have been involved as PED and OBI and other agencies converge on this topic of connectivity. And you'll see the timeline there as we marched forward towards completing the plan and applying for the Digital Equity State Capacity Grant. Next slide. We do want to also highlight that partnering, as Benton and the Department of Ed have noted, is key to our success. We cannot do this in a silo. The Public Education Department rolled up their sleeves and jumped into this. IAD, Indian Affairs Department, Department of Workforce Solutions, Department of Cultural Affairs, the Higher Ed Department, the Department of Veteran Affairs, Aging and Long-Term Services, Department of Transportation, and more. Next slide. And of course, based on the Digital Equity Capacity Grant, we're looking at the barriers that were identified by NTIA, which many of us on this call are quite familiar with. But just to remind folks, availability and affordability in our state are critical. Affordability in particular, a huge obstacle. If you even have the access to the internet, we're very rural, and many of our regions are still struggling with no choice or no internet whatsoever. Number two, once you have availability and affordability, is it accessible and inclusive? And of course, do you have the, not just the skills, but the confidence to use this tool meaningfully? And then number four, of course, do you have the ability to use it safely? So privacy and cybersecurity are a top issue. And of course, then there's the topic of devices, which are expensive and need to be replaced and need to be affordable. And people need to know where to go to get help if something's not working with their device. Next slide. Also touching on areas of impact as our state mobilized, we're looking at all of those agencies and organizations that serve in these areas of impact, both economic, education, health, civic and social engagement, and essential services. Next slide. Our covered populations as well, laid out by NTIA, but reminder, low-income households, aging, incarcerated, veterans, people with disabilities, language barriers, ethnic minorities, and rural inhabitants. Next slide. And in our state, it's interesting to report that when you look at our covered population breakdown, over 91% of our entire state fits into a covered population. So our entire state is, we have to look at what are we doing to overcome the digital divide for our entire state, basically. Next slide. One of the things underway, which was mentioned earlier, is the statewide education network. I don't know why that slide is so light, but I will just quickly read out loud. What the heck is a statewide education network? We refer to it as an acronym, the SEN. It's for New Mexican schools and school districts. The state is remote, rural, and sparsely populated in many areas. And IT expertise is not uniformly available in all of our school districts and across the state. So the SEN, the Statewide Education Network, was designed to provide better connectivity and expert network management. And it's the foundation for a state-coordinated, basically middle mile or broadband highway. Next slide, we'll take a look at what that looks like. So here in New Mexico, we're looking at optimizing connectivity to schools, leveraging and maximizing E-rate funding, reducing administrative burden, reducing cybersecurity risk, and providing services for schools at the same cost or lower. Also, you'll notice from looking at the image here, our state outline, it is intended to be a giant circle with multiple paths of connectivity. So if by chance one of those legs are cut, you can alternate and go the other way around to maintain maximum access at all times, or for as much as possible, we can still run the system even if it gets cut in one place. So we have multiple choices of routing of information and access. Next slide. The SEN process is a big one. It's taken massive interagency collaboration. It's taken champions inside of state leadership, all the way through our state government, including dedicated staff at OBI and other agencies that are stewarding this heavy lift. It's coordinating educational institutions at K-12 level, at the higher education level, and building the infrastructure between them. We have to establish nodes, which means upgrading electrical and cooling systems for higher ed facilities that house those nodes. It means establishing those major routes, identifying and adding key middle mile corridors, and closing the rings of resiliency, we call it. And then establishing meet me and aggregation points, which are the launching points for the last mile. Next slide. That process, I do have to also say, our very first launch of the SEN kicks off next week. We are so excited, and it will be a phased approach. So, you know, do you see that design is not all kicking off at the beginning of July, but will roll in as each piece is put into place. Meanwhile, we're also looking at the New Mexico Digital Equity Capacity Grant. The state of New Mexico right now is expecting approximately $8 million allocation, and the state has prioritized the sub-award process for that funding to move it to our trusted member organizations and to members of our working groups who have literally been meeting for years to collaborate, coordinate, and share best practices, and are already, in many cases, implementing digital inclusion activities, and to fund our local digital inclusion programs. Neela may speak more to this, but our Digital Equity Capacity Grant, like many states, the proposal was submitted as required to NTIA on May 28th. And like everyone, we are waiting anxiously to see what happens. Excited to announce, for many of you already know, yesterday, NTIA announced the first award to the state of Nevada. So it is up and running. And next slide. I think we're coming to the end of my section. Just in case you need to reach Neela or myself, our contact info is included. And we'll let John tell you a little bit more about specific things that are happening in relation to the Public Education Department and K-12 efforts statewide.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for the nice setup. And my name is John Chadwick, and my semi-official title is Digital Equity Coordinator. So let's go ahead and get, jump right into it. Next slide, please. So what is digital equity? We really are focused on, using the National Ed Tech Plan as part of how we address the digital divide. We're looking at the NTIA grant opportunities that Jennifer just spoke about. We have included our digital equity in our strategic agency strategic plan, and we've launched Future Ready Technology Digital Equity Technology Planning. Then that actually aligns with what we have in statute with the Digital Equity in Education Act and the National Educational Technology Plan. And we are looking at everything. How did we get here? Digital equity in education passed in 2023. PED strategic plan addresses closing of the digital divide. And we really want to make sure that it's our districts and state charters that determine the best solutions based on their unique needs. And we've been using the Digital Resources Survey developed by the Council for Chief State School Officers and codified by the National Center for Educational Statistics. We are also using that, we will be adding one extra element in there, one extra question. And we've been using this, data and, working with the Office of Broadband to map unserved and underserved students. So we know where those needs are really most prevalent. Next slide. So how did we get here with these, with student digital resources? In 2020, it was adopted by the Council Chief State School Officers, and a year later, it was adopted by National Center for Educational Statistics. We've created dashboards for Yazzie Martinez districts. That was a lawsuit that came up even before the pandemic about equity in education, and we got hit with adding technology and a tech order to make sure that those districts have not just equitable education, but also access to devices and access to connectivity. And we've been doing, we've been tracking, the Yazzie Martinez districts as well as all districts. Last year was an interesting year. We, in the past year, we've done transition to the EdFi data standards, and it's improved data collection. And I've seen, the 120-day, we have 4 data reporting periods. The 120-day at end of year, really, our districts have really stepped up, and we're getting really good data from them about how they're using technology and what is needed. And for the upcoming school year, we're adding barrier to internet in residence to the data collection. And we're also going to be adding a little what if to include school policy, because there are some districts that say, okay, if you're a kindergarten student or pre-K, we're not going to give you a device. And others, they start kids out at kindergarten, and it's all it really is all up to the district and their policies. And what's coming down the future, we've been talking with the state of Nebraska, and we've been talking with Fresno Unified Schools that they have, both have automated speed tests. They're not ready for prime time yet, but we're looking at how that could be integrated into our, for our schools to get a handle on what is being used, how technology is being used, how the, things are working outside of the school, walls. And of course, the State Education Network is going to be critical. I just came back from ISTE, and what was amazing to me is that kids, what kids are doing, these young people are just fantastic. We're seeing collaboration, not just, across the state, but across the, all around the world. Students collaborating, learning, understanding culture, just breaking down barriers that have been there for, quite some time. So it's just gratifying to see what, these young people are doing. Thank you. And let's go to the next slide. For the capacity grants, for the grants that will be coming out, we're going to be encouraging districts and regional education cooperatives to apply for funding. And I'm going to do a quick shout out to one of our school districts. Cuba Independent School District has provided Starlink devices and service to all students, as well as teachers and staff living in the district. They are the only one of about 2 districts that have universal connectivity for all their students. And we're also looking at other creative ways to ensure students have connectivity outside of school. I just had a meeting, when I was at ISTE with with something that looks very promising, LTE devices or 5G devices that run on band 18 or 20, so you can get 100 meg downloads on a mobile hotspot. So we're looking at, how can we engage with some of our schools and do a pilot with it. And of course, our RECs have provided professional development for teachers. More than 200 teachers have taken classes at Eastern New Mexico University, and we just had the EDGI badge, wrap up from REC 9. But all of it is to better use technology in teaching practices and benefits our students, and it provides critical support for our teachers. Next slide. And we're working with our state policymakers to take a holistic approach to understand broadband and digital equity. That includes working with our RECs over the past 2 years. And like I said, more teachers are receiving professional development to improve the use of technology in the classroom that benefits our teachers and our students. We obtain grant funding for digital citizenship training for teachers and families. And I'm really happy to see that happening. It also aligns with our tech planning, what's required in statute, because digital citizenship training for teachers is mandated in statute. And, we can offer this for free to all teachers in the state. And, we just launched our first Future Ready tech planning cohort. And if you're not familiar with Future Ready, it is really more of a strategic plan on how a school district is going to address digital equity. And there's not going to be two plans that look the same. They're going to be, each one will be different. It'll be unique. And I'm really happy to, with our first cohort. Next slide. And future goals, well, things are still under review by our agency leadership. But a couple of the things that we're looking at least on the device side, we're seeking predictable, reliable, and sustainable funding for device refresh for districts and state charters. And some of the goals, could include a stipend to help districts refresh devices. We want to ensure that all students in the state have access to a school-issued device. And we want to make sure that devices for students are based on individual school policies. And I will add one thing about the school-issued devices. We have some schools, districts that recognize the need for technology and having home access, but they don't have a school-issued device. And we want to take that burden off the district and make sure that they have school-issued devices. Next slide. And we are also seeking support for what we call the Digital Equity and Education Tech Fund. There's actually two, there's two state, tech funds, and we are distinguishing ourselves from another one by calling it the Digital Equity and Education Tech Fund. We want to make sure that there's adequate support so all schools can participate in Future Ready tech planning cohorts if they so desire. We also are, Future Ready is tied to the Digital Equity and Education Act, requirements, as well as the National Ed Tech Plan. We have a program for, we want to have a program for schools to procure tools to ensure digital equity and understanding how technology use that will meet the individual needs of individual schools. And I'll do a quick shout out to ISTE, COSN, CETA, and other groups that are actually developing a way to assess the impact of these educational technology applications that are used in our schools. And we want to make sure that there's adequate funding for our RECs. They've done the teacher professional development, keep that going. We've had student run help desks, and that's important, gives job skills and training for students to learn how to, work on computers. And we've had digital learning coaches because we've seen that being, as a critical need. Larger districts can afford digital learning coaches. Smaller districts, you have your digital learning, if anybody's doing technology, it's because they are also the bus driver and they know how to turn on a computer. That's how they got their job. And we want to make sure that everybody has that support that's needed to properly implement technology in the classroom. Next slide. And there's several projects that are going on to address digital equity. We're working with the UNM Telehealth or Tele Equity Program to learn if access to broadband devices at home translates not only into better health outcomes, but better education outcomes. We're in discussion with a data group to provide case studies on how state education agency data collection could be used for improved student outcomes. And I will be joining the CETA, State Education Technology Directors Association Universal Connectivity Imperative work group that launches next month. And and it's the leader is a former Office of Ed Tech staffer. And next. And of course, we want to make sure that all students have home internet access. It's a long journey. It's a bumpy road out there, as Jennifer, reminded us. But we want to make sure that, the home connectivity meets all the FCC speed recommendations. OBI is working to build, infrastructure. And I'm just really excited to see what they're working on. But there's also excellent bridge solutions. I mentioned Starlink, but there's other low orbit satellite, solutions that are coming along, as well as, like I said, what I've been working with, a group I'm working with that looking at mobile hotspots that are capable of, minimum of 100 meg downloads. And we're going to continue to collaborate with OBI because having these partnerships is critical for, long-term success for this state. And we want to continue to support the mapping to identify locations of unserved and underserved students. And of course, the research project at UNM and how that impact, the impact on home connectivity devices for health outcomes and for, education outcomes. And next slide, I think we're right at the end. All right, thank you.
Great. Thanks for those great presentations, John and Jennifer. We're going to go ahead now and move into our moderated Q&A session. I'd like to remind folks in the audience that we'll be taking questions in a bit that you can submit through the comments, and we'll bring them into the discussion as we can. So I'd like to bring back everybody so we can start our panel. Awesome. So something we've been hearing a lot about lately is the importance of building and strengthening partnerships now in advance of some of the major funding opportunities that are coming down. Jennifer, you started working with John as part of a team addressing the homework gap in New Mexico. How did having that existing partnership help as you went into the digital equity planning process?
Hi, just making sure I'm off, unmute. I would say first and foremost, meeting consistently over time builds your understanding of each other and also what you are tending to on a regular basis. And then you can begin to see how they fit together. That weaving and continuum of relationship means John can just call me, right? Or I just ring him and go, what about this? What about that? I think our state is very collaborative in general. I mean, some people would say, yes, we can all silo, but after years and years of being, sort of rural and challenged in many ways, we also know that we survive by working together ultimately. And so I think in the long haul, the grassroots response, the respect that people have for each other, the commitment, it's a mission. And also it meant that, we're already in communication. We're already looking at how do we share data? Oh, we have a new data coordinator. Make sure they talk to John in that department and this department talks. So starting to reweave our agencies and our organizations and building across entities. So industry, nonprofits, agencies, government, tribes. It's a lot of work and it's very personal, I would say, but it did lay the foundation that allows us to move things and get things done, if that makes sense, or to think creatively, what assets do you have? What can you accomplish? What do we have? And how do we piece it together? It is a bit of a giant jigsaw puzzle, and it does require the ability to kind of figure out how to sew the pieces together as a quilt. But I think it was really fundamental and great that we started there. And then our community got involved with the Broadband Collective and the foundations, so that as OBI came into being, it was already a theme of interagency and community collaboration.
And I would add, just be, based on what I learned this past week at ISTE, AI is coming down the track like a out of control speeding freight train. But we want to make sure that our students have the skills and the knowledge how to use it best. Our teachers have the skills and knowledge how to use it best, and we want to make sure that it doesn't create a whole new level of digital divide between the haves and the have-nots. And so, I just wanted to say, the technology is changing, but the need to address digital equity does not change.
Great, thank you. John, my next question is for you. What education-related metrics will the state measure to ensure progress?
We've actually been doing that. We have our data collection that we've been working on, and we collect data such as does a student have a device? Is it a school issued device, or did somebody bring it to them? Bring it themselves, or are they using something that you already had at home? We also are asking questions around, do you have internet at home? What's the internet performance like? Is it, can they do their homework? Are they, do they have periodic problems, or is it just really unstable and unusable? And, so we are collecting that. We will also be starting to collect data around, what's the barrier to internet access in the home, and which I think is going to be critical for the work that Jennifer and Neela and others are doing to really have an understanding what is going on. Why are families, not having internet? We know that affordability and availability are issues, but what percent is availability and what percent is affordability? And that gives us the ability to start understanding how do we address that need.
Awesome. We wanted to highlight New Mexico because of the great commitments the state made to working with educational institutions within the Digital Equity Plan. Neela, how will the state collaborate with education partners as you implement that plan?
I mean, John and Jennifer discussed greatly how we are, partnering with the different state agencies and how the Office of Broadband is partnering with PED. I mean, to implement the equity plan, obviously you need funding. So the BEAD funding, broadband access and deployment funding. We also have Connect New Mexico state funding, as well as ARPA funding that we're usually using to address the connectivity issues. As Jennifer mentioned, our allotment is supposed to be about $8.67 million for the State Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program, which, it's really a drop in the bucket, given all the funding that we need, but it is obviously a starting point, and we're very appreciative of it. So with that said, OBI intends to subgrant approximately 85% of that funding, or about $7.37 million, to implement digital equity projects. Through OBI's project selection process to be determined, we'll take deliberate steps to ensure that subgrant opportunities are accessible to a diverse range of organizations with very digital equity outcomes. And of course we have to subgrant projects that serve the covered populations. And so we are encouraging, for example, the regional education cooperations to apply for that subgrant, workforce development organizations, nonprofit organizations, et cetera. So we're really hoping to get that money out out to the communities so we can move the needle on digital equity and inclusion. And so that's how we plan to partner. Obviously, with federal funding, we have a lot of data that we need to collect to ensure that for accountability. So some data, that we'll need to collect from our subgrantees are, the number of covered populations that they served, the number of people served within each covered populations, the total number of people served, and as well as the impact on the state's goals regarding economic and workforce development outcomes, educational outcomes, health outcomes, etc. So yeah, that's how we plan to partner moving forward. And obviously we have, well, not obviously, but you heard about our state education network. That is another funding source as well that we've received. I believe it's state funding. And John mentioned other funding sources that he's received. So it's really a patchwork of funding sources to implement this digital equity plan.
Awesome. Thank you, Neela.
Mm-hmm.
Dominique, could you draw some similarities between New Mexico and other model states, maybe specifically pertaining to their work with tribal agencies?
Sure. So elevating what has been mentioned, New Mexico and other model states collaborate well. With New Mexico, its state plan intentionally draws out how to support tribal populations with ongoing stakeholder engagement. And so New Mexico has strengthened relationships with tribal communities and is moving the needle on developing capacity with tribal communities and organizations by improving access to data and resources. And examples of this include collaborating with tribal nations, colleges, and universities, the creation of the New Mexico Council, which includes representatives from state entities and tribal governments to create a fund that supports competitive broadband grant programs. Strengthen communities by developing co-working spaces for rural and tribal communities, which includes enhanced services for housing, health, and older adults, which aligns to the digital equity goals, as well as creating access to the technology and the platforms that keep and maintain cultural heritage. The Department of Workforce Solutions provides statewide oversight for workforce development and training programs for youth and adults across all covered populations. Many public libraries offer skill classes, provide services that support public and tribal communities, and deliver direct library services to rural populations. State agencies and the visually impaired and the physically disabled students and residents. And the Santa Fe Indian School, which is owned by 19 Pueblos of New Mexico, launched a project to grow the capabilities for tribal members and staff to operate their own broadband networks by training a cohort of technical and administrative team members. And so these are just a few of the many examples of how New Mexico is accelerating digital access for tribal communities and for the learners farthest from the opportunities, especially through strong partnerships between broadband and education leaders. So I'll pass it back to you, Zoe.
Jennifer, I believe you had something you want to add.
Yeah, I was going to add just a shout out to Santa Fe Indian School, as you mentioned, Dominique, because in addition to, building capacity locally, they launched the COOL program, Cultivating Our Own to Lead, partnered with the higher ed department, Santa Fe Community College, to train fiber optic technicians to run their own networks, to manage their own networks, to do customer service, and now to launch digital navigators in their own languages for their own community members to skill up. I did want to also say, though, while the state is building the statewide education network, it's running alongside of or integrated with the PEN, which is the Pueblo Education Network. So the Pueblos are building just what you saw with the SEN, the same exact thing to connect all the Pueblos and connect it to the state's middle mile. So we will have these two systems in action dedicated to education, right? Both at the Pueblo level and the state level. Pretty amazing.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. All right. So my last question before we bring in some of our audience questions is for Jennifer and John and Neela all. What does success look like? Jennifer, we can start with you.
Well, I mean, honestly, I would say it was said earlier by John, all students have home internet access and the devices and skills they need to use them meaningfully and safely and affordably.
Yeah, and thank you, Jennifer. I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, Being at ISTE this week is a reminder that everything would, at least from the PED standpoint, everything we're doing is for the students. If the students are successful, then I consider that success.
Neela?
I mean, yeah, obviously digital equity and inclusion is it's not going to be solved within 3 years or 5 years. It's an ongoing process. So, I just even incremental change that we're already seeing is a huge success metric to me. And, coming from more of the NTI and measuring the federal grants, et cetera, we do, have to have accountability. So we need to have a good measurement plan in place and a lot of data sharing. Just as every day as we have new meetings, we realize new data sources or studies that other agencies are doing. So for example, we learned recently about the research project John is working on. So again, collecting this data and analyzing the data and seeing where we're successful and where we may need to adapt strategies. But again, it's incremental, but New Mexico certainly is on its way.
Awesome. So now we're going to open it up to audience questions. Again, if you have any questions for our wonderful panelists, please drop them in the chat, and our producers, Revati and Grace, and I will bring them into our discussion. I believe we have a question about nonprofit subgrantees. Can nonprofits apply individually for subgrants, or must we partner across aligned organizations like adult education centers to demonstrate larger impact?
This may vary by state, but nonprofits are certainly eligible entities. And within the NOFO, Notice of Funding Opportunity, they are eligible entities as well. So New Mexico is really encouraging our nonprofits to apply because they have a huge impact on digital equity as it is.
Awesome. Our next question is about sustainability plans. Are there sustainability plans for these programs once the federal dollars run out?
I'll go ahead and field that one because that's one of the things we're trying to do with device refresh. When the pandemic hit, a lot of districts, scrambled to get, Chromebooks and other devices. And now that the funding has run out, we also are seeing some of those devices going end of life. And so we're looking, so that's one of the things we're trying to get through, looking at, in our agency, our leadership is looking at this. And, so yes, we're working on that sustainability issue, to address continued connectivity and devices.
Yeah, and again, we have limited funding here in New Mexico. So, we're aggregating different data sources, looking for other grant opportunities, outside of the State Digital Equity Capacity Grant. There's telehealth grants, there's various grants that all come together to help us implement this digital equity plan. So obviously we just can't rely on this $8.67 million that we're getting through the State Digital Equity Capacity Grant funding. I'm
gonna, if it's okay, Neela, just add to what you're bringing up because it's really important. It's not a question we have the answer to yet. Sustainability is we're looking for long-term creative solutions. One of the things we're seeing though is that because we have limited funding, we start somewhere and then we're looking at what supports that and sustains it. And an interesting example, as it becomes embedded and habitualized, it spreads out across the wider lens. I use that example because back when I was teaching middle school, reading issues were paramount, and reading at a 7th grade science class is very different than reading 3rd grade, for fun. So the skills you need are different, but as reading became a topic everybody has in the back of their mind, it began to be habitualized and embedded across all the curriculum. I know that sounds crazy, but same with one of our tribal communities. They changed to digital time cards. They had to embed how to use the internet to sign in and sign out. And they use that as a leverage point to teach other skills and digital skilling up for their entire agencies and staff. And so I think one of the things is not only looking for resources elsewhere that add to our grant pool and funding, building funding in for the long haul. Like, we cannot rely on requests every year. We need a long-term solution for devices, but also looking at where it embeds telehealth workers. Is there a place to embed digital skilling and where and what they're already doing so that it becomes habitualized across all? I mean, that's just, you know, a little bit on left field to say that out loud today, but it is part of our long-term sustainability thinking and looking for where we build it into the systems that are already in place.
Well, that's a great point, Jennifer. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that sustainability piece. That's what we're trying to do within our agency as we are looking at, how we fund this going forward, especially on the devices and home connectivity and other, other initiatives. So yes, long-term sustainability is going to be critical.
And just one last thing to note, shout out to our PED too for already investing prior to the DE Capacity Grant Award for our state, already investing in digital citizenship training down the pipeline. If you grow up with these tools, but you also grow up with being trained in what it means to be responsible online or with these tools, that spreads to the family, that spreads and grows deeper as you get older. So I love the digital citizenship focus that's going on right now, like already in motion.
Awesome. Well, we are coming to the end of our time. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists, Jennifer, Neela, John, and Dominique. I'd like to touch on a few resources for anyone interested in learning more about this topic. And we have a slide to put up with these resources. There we go. This first link is to a recording of the first session of the Power of Partnership series highlighting North Carolina. Capitalizing on the Moment is a blog that the Office of Educational Technology wrote about some of the states committing to great partnerships with education. Digital and Educational Equity is the Benton Institute article based on our audit of state digital equity plans. And the last link is to the Office of Educational Technology's Stories of EdTech Innovation, which collects stories of some of the great and creative uses of educational technology around the United States. This was the second of a 3-part webinar series, so I hope you'll join us for our third and final webinar on Wednesday, July 10th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern, which will highlight Maine. Thank you for attending the Power of Partnership State Strategies for Digital and Educational Equity, and we hope to see you next time.